The blood-red sunset painted the New Mexico sky as Zara Dawson clutched her mother's worn Bible, dust swirling around her boots and the charred remains of what was once her family home. She had lost everything in a single night: her parents, her home, and her faith. It was 1875, and at 22, Zara found herself utterly alone in the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier. The wind carried ash and memories as Zara knelt beside the crude wooden crosses she had fashioned. Her fingers trembled as she opened the Bible to her mother's favorite psalm. "Lord, hear my..." Her voice faltered, the words catching in her throat like tumbleweeds on barbed wire. "Lord, hear my prayer." She tried again, but grief closed her throat as effectively as a hangman's noose. "Most folks find it hard to talk to him when they need him most," came a deep voice from behind her. Zara whirled around, nearly dropping the Bible. A tall figure sat atop a dappled gray horse, silhouetted against the dying sun. As he dismounted and stepped closer, she could see he wore a dust-covered coat and a weathered hat pulled low over his eyes. A star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "Marshal Ethan Porter," he said, removing his hat respectfully as he approached. "I heard about the fire." Came as soon as word reached town. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, settled on the fresh graves and a muscle tightened in his jaw. "I am truly sorry for your loss, Miss Dawson." Her voice shook as she tried to pray again, but the words wouldn't come. The marshal took her hands in his, calloused palms warm against her cold fingers. "I'll answer beside you forever," he said quietly, kneeling next to her in the New Mexico dirt. "Sometimes God needs human voices to do his talking." Together they spoke the words, his steady baritone guiding her trembling voice through the psalm. When they finished, Zara felt something she hadn't expected: not peace exactly, but the first gentle stirring of strength. "The Rogers family has offered you a place to stay in town," Marshal Porter said, helping her to her feet. "I can take you there now if you're ready." Zara looked back at the blackened timbers of her childhood home. "What will happen to the land? It's all I have left. It's yours by right." "No one's going to take it from you," he assured her, though something in his expression suggested there was more to tell. "You're not saying everything," she observed, her voice finding its firmness again. Ethan Porter sighed, adjusting his hat. "There are rumors that the fire wasn't an accident. The railway's been buying up land all through this territory. Some folks who have refused their offers have met with misfortune." "You think the railroad killed my parents?" Zara felt her knees weaken. "I don't know yet," the marshal replied honestly, "but I aim to find out. For now, though, you need somewhere safe to rest." As they rode toward town, Zara on her family's surviving mare and Porter on his gray, she studied the lawman's profile. He couldn't be much older than 30, but responsibility had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. He sat tall in the saddle, alert to every sound in the gathering darkness. "How long have you been marshal?" she asked, seeking distraction from her grief. 3 years in Silver Creek, 5 years wearing a badge altogether." He glanced over at her. "Your father was one of the first to welcome me. Said a town needs law to grow proper." Zara nodded, the memory of her father's steadfast principles bringing fresh tears. "He believed in justice above all things." "A good man," Porter agreed, "which is why I won't rest until I know what happened." The town of Silver Creek emerged from the darkening plain like an island in a sea of grass. A single street of wooden buildings, most 2 stories tall, formed the heart of the settlement. Oil lamps glowed in windows, and a piano tinkled from the saloon. Mrs. Rogers, the middle-aged wife of the general store owner, welcomed Zara with encompassing arms and gentle words. She showed her to a small but clean room above the store and promised hot food and coffee. "You'll stay as long as you need, child," the woman insisted. "Joseph and I have plenty of space now that our boys have moved to Denver." Zara thanked her with all the politeness she could muster, but when left alone, she sank onto the narrow bed and finally surrendered to the torrent of grief she'd been holding back. She didn't know how much time had passed when a soft knock came at her door. Composing herself as best she could, She opened it to find Marshal Porter holding a tray with a steaming bowl of stew and a cup of coffee. "Mrs. Rogers thought you might not feel up to coming down," he explained, offering the tray. Zara accepted it with murmured thanks, surprised by her sudden hunger. "Will you?" she hesitated. "Would you stay a moment? I have questions about what happens next." Ethan nodded, taking a seat on the room's only chair while she perched on the edge of the bed with the tray on her lap. "The bank holds the deed to your family's property," he began. "You'll need to speak with Mr. Winters about transferring it to your name. As your father's only heir, there shouldn't be complications. Unless the railroad creates them," Zara observed, stirring her stew. "I've sent telegrams to the territorial judge and the federal marshal's office," Ethan said. "If there's evidence of foul play, we'll have support in pursuing it. And if there isn't," Ethan's gaze was direct, "then we'll still make sure your rights are protected. But Zara, may I call you Zara?" At her nod, he continued. "The railroad has powerful friends. Money talks in Washington, and out here it sometimes speaks with guns." She set down her spoon, appetite fading. "Are you suggesting I sell, after what they might have done?" "No," he replied firmly. "I'm telling you what we're facing so you can make your own decisions. Your father valued the truth above comfort. I figured you might be the same." The assessment, so accurate and delivered without condescension, surprised her. "I am," she acknowledged. "And I won't be bullied off my family's land, Marshal Porter." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "If I'm calling you Zara seems right, you should call me Ethan." "Ethan," she tested the name, finding it suited him, solid and unpretentious. "Thank you for your honesty and for the prayer earlier. I'm not sure I could have managed alone." "No one should have to face such moments alone," he said simply, rising to leave. "Try to rest. Tomorrow will bring enough challenges of its own." After he'd gone, Zara finished her meal and prepared for bed, her mind racing with all that had happened. As exhaustion finally claimed her, her last thought was of warm hands holding hers and a steady voice guiding her through darkness. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Mr. Rogers insisted on escorting Zara to the bank, where Mr. Winters, a thin man with perpetually ink-stained fingers, expressed condolences while preparing the necessary paperwork. "I must inform you, Miss Dawson," the banker said, adjusting his spectacles, "that there is an outstanding offer from the Western Railway Company for your family's property. Quite generous, I might add." "My parents rejected that offer," Zara replied firmly. "As do I," Winters cleared his throat. "Perhaps in light of recent events, you might reconsider. Starting fresh elsewhere could be beneficial." "Are you suggesting I should profit from my parents' deaths, Mr. Winters?" Zara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The banker paled. "Certainly not. You merely what?" Marshal Porter's voice came from the doorway where he now stood, watching the exchange with interest. "Marshal," Winters nodded stiffly, "just discussing Miss Dawson's options." "I'm sure." Ethan stepped fully into the office. "Miss Dawson, I've come to escort you to the telegraph office. There's a message from the territorial judge." Outside, Zara took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. "Thank you for the rescue. I was about to say something unladylike." "I'd have paid good money to hear it," Ethan chuckled. "Winters has been in the railway's pocket since they first showed interest in this region." At the telegraph office, the news was mixed. The judge would send an investigator, but not for at least 2 weeks. In the meantime, Ethan was authorized to begin gathering evidence. "I want to help," Zara insisted as they walked back toward the general store. "It was my home, my family." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "It could be dangerous." "I'm already in danger if what you suspect is true," she countered. "At least this way I'm doing something about it." He nodded slowly. "We'll start by visiting your property again. There might be evidence we missed in the aftermath." They rode out after midday, the spring sun warm on their backs. Approaching the burned homestead brought a fresh wave of grief for Zara, but this time determination tempered her sorrow. Methodically, they searched through the rubble. Ethan showed her what to look for, anything that seemed out of place or didn't belong. After an hour of careful examination, Zara called him over to where she was sifting through the remains of what had been the kitchen. "This isn't ours," she said, holding up a metal flask. The silver container was scorched but intact, with initials engraved on one side. J.M. Ethan took it carefully. "James Mercer," he muttered, "works for the railway as hired muscle. You think he set the fire?" Zara asked, her heart racing. "It's evidence, but not proof." Ethan pocketed the flask. "We need more." They continued searching until the light began to fade, finding nothing else of significance. As they prepared to leave, Zara walked to her parents' graves, placing wildflowers she had gathered on each mound. "I'll make this right," she promised softly. "Somehow." Riding back to town, they discussed next steps. "Mercer usually drinks at the Silverton Saloon," Ethan explained. "I can question him, but it might spook whoever's giving the orders." "So we need to find out who that is first," Zara reasoned. "The railway has an office in town, doesn't it?" Ethan nodded. "Regional director visits once a month. He's due next week." "Then we have time to build our case," she said, a plan forming in her mind. "The railway needs documentation for land acquisitions. If they're using intimidation tactics, there might be records." Breaking into a railway office would be a serious crime, Ethan warned, though she noticed he didn't outright reject the idea. "I wasn't suggesting breaking in," Zara replied innocently, "but the railway employs clerks, doesn't it?" "Clerks who might visit the general store where I'm currently residing." A reluctant smile tugged at Ethan's mouth. "Miss Dawson, I believe there's more to you than meets the eye." "My father didn't raise a wilting flower," she agreed. "He taught me to think for myself and stand for what's right." "Good qualities," Ethan observed, his eyes lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. Over the next several days, Zara established herself as a helpful presence in the Rogers store. She learned that Timothy Jenkins, a young clerk from the railway office, came in regularly for tobacco and stationery supplies. When he arrived on Thursday afternoon, Zara was ready with a warm smile and attentive conversation. The youth, barely 20 and clearly unused to female attention, was easily charmed. "You must know so much about the railway's plans," she remarked, arranging pencils while he browsed. "It sounds like such important work." Timothy straightened his collar. "Well, I do handle most of the documentation. Mr. Crawford, he's the regional director, says I have the neatest handwriting in the territory." "I can imagine," Zara nodded admiringly. "All those land contracts and agreements, it must be overwhelming." "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially lately with the expansion push. Mr. Crawford's under pressure from the Eastern office to secure the right-of-way by summer's end." "I imagine that creates difficulties when people don't want to sell," Zara suggested carefully. Timothy lowered his voice. "Between us, there's a special file for the reluctant cases. Mr. Crawford calls it persuasive negotiations." "How fascinating," Zara breathed, heart pounding at the potential breakthrough. "You must be very trustworthy to be privy to such matters." The clerk blushed furiously. "Mr. Crawford doesn't know I've seen it. I was filing late one night and found it by accident." Before Zara could press further, the store bell jingled as Marshal Porter entered. Timothy immediately stiffened, mumbled a hasty goodbye, and hurried out with his purchases. "You scared him off," Zara sighed once they were alone. "Looked like he was getting a bit too comfortable," Ethan replied, a strange edge to his voice. Zara raised an eyebrow. "That was the point. He mentioned a special file for reluctant sellers, called it persuasive negotiations." Ethan's expression sharpened. "Did he now? That's something we can use." "If we can see the file," Zara pointed out. "I was about to suggest he show me the office sometime when you arrived, looking all Marshal-like." "And how exactly would you explain your interest in railway documentation?" Ethan challenged, crossing his arms. "I'd think of something," Zara countered. "Women are often underestimated, Marshal Porter. It can be quite advantageous." Something flickered in his eyes, concern, perhaps, or admiration, or both. "Just be careful. These men won't hesitate to hurt you if they suspect what you're after." His concern warmed her, even as she recognized its validity. "I will, but we need that evidence. We'll get it," he promised, "but together. I've got a plan that might work better than fluttering your eyelashes at a besotted clerk." The plan, as it turned out, involved Ethan creating a distraction at the railway office while Zara slipped in through the back to search for the file. They waited until Saturday when most of the staff would be gone, leaving only a skeleton crew. 10 minutes, Ethan instructed as they stood in the alley behind the building. "If you haven't found it by then, get out regardless. I can only keep them occupied for so long." Zara nodded, heart hammering against her ribs. "Be careful yourself." "Always am," he replied with a confidence she wasn't sure was entirely genuine. Once Ethan had walked around to the front, Zara counted to 30 before trying the back door. It was unlocked as they'd hoped, small-town security being relatively lax. She slipped inside, finding herself in a narrow corridor leading to several offices. She moved silently, listening to the sound of raised voices from the front room. Ethan was loudly questioning the weekend clerk about a suspicious character reportedly seen near the railway office. The clerk was protesting ignorance while Ethan insisted on checking the premises. Zara quickly scanned the labels on the office doors. The largest at the end of the hall read William Crawford, Regional Director. She tried the handle locked. Remembering a trick her father had taught her, she removed a hairpin and manipulated it in the keyhole. After several tense moments, she heard a satisfying click. Inside, Crawford's office was opulent compared to the rest of the building: thick carpet, leather chairs, and a massive oak desk. Zara headed straight for the filing cabinet in the corner, methodically working through the drawers. In the third drawer, behind a stack of routine contracts, she found a leather portfolio labeled simply Special Acquisitions. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a series of documents detailing properties along the planned railway route, including her family's farm. Most disturbing were the notations beside several names, including her father's. "Requires additional persuasion. Mercer and Associates authorized to proceed." The dates matched perfectly with incidents of vandalism, threats, and finally, the fire. Zara quickly replaced everything except the page regarding her family's property, which she folded and tucked into her bodice. She was just closing the drawer when she heard footsteps approaching down the hall. Heart pounding, she looked frantically for a hiding place. The window was too small and there was no closet. With seconds to spare, she dove beneath the massive desk, tucking herself into the knee-hole and praying whoever was coming wouldn't need to sit down. The door opened, and 2 sets of footsteps entered. "I assure you, Marshal, there's nothing irregular about our operations," came an unfamiliar voice, smooth as oiled leather. "Just doing my job, Mr. Crawford," Ethan replied, his tone professionally neutral. "When a distinguished citizen like yourself returns unexpectedly from a trip, it's my duty to ensure everything's secure, Crawford. He wasn't supposed to be in town until next week." Zara's blood ran cold. "How considerate," Crawford replied dryly. "Though I wonder why your concern extends to my private office." "Report mentioned this area specifically," Ethan said. "Won't take but a moment to check the windows and such." Zara held her breath as footsteps circled the room. From her hiding place, she could see polished boots moving past Ethan's worn leather ones and Crawford's expensive city footwear. "Everything appears in order," Ethan finally declared. "Sorry to have disturbed your Saturday, sir." "Not at all," Crawford replied with false geniality. "Always happy to assist our local law enforcement, though I must say, Marshal, your sudden interest in railway security coincides remarkably with Miss Dawson's unfortunate situation." There was a moment of tense silence. "The timing is coincidental," Ethan said carefully. "Though any connection between railway interests and crimes against local citizens would certainly warrant investigation." "Crimes?" Crawford chuckled. "Accidents happen, Marshal, especially in such primitive conditions. Oil lamps tip over, stoves malfunction. Tragic, but hardly criminal." Unless someone makes them happen, Ethan countered, his voice hardening. A serious accusation, Crawford observed. One that would require substantial evidence. Evidence I'm confident doesn't exist. We'll see about that, Ethan replied. Good day, Mr. Crawford. Marshal. The railway man's voice stopped him at the door. A word of advice. The railway brings progress. Those who stand in its way rarely prosper. That applies to interfering lawmen as much as stubborn farmers. Is that a threat, Mr. Crawford? Merely an observation of historical patterns, Crawford replied smoothly. Good day. The door closed, but to Zara's horror, Crawford didn't leave. Instead, he moved to his desk and pulled out the chair. She pressed herself further into the shadows, scarcely daring to breathe as his legs appeared inches from her face. He began shuffling papers, humming tunelessly. Then, abruptly, he stood and walked to the filing cabinet. Zara heard the drawer open, the same one she'd been searching. Interesting, Crawford murmured. There was a pause, then the sound of him crossing to the door. Jenkins, he called sharply. The timid clerk appeared moments later. Yes, Mr. Crawford. Has anyone besides myself accessed these files recently? No, sir. They're kept locked as you instructed. Then why, Crawford asked dangerously, does this folder appear to have been disturbed? Zara's heart nearly stopped. I don't know, sir, Jenkins stammered. Perhaps when you reviewed them last. Crawford was silent for a long moment. Perhaps, he finally conceded. Return to your duties, and Jenkins, not a word about my early return to anyone. Understood? Yes, sir. After Jenkins departed, Crawford returned to his desk, sitting heavily in his chair. Zara could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying, as his knees nearly touched her skirts. For what seemed an eternity, he worked at his desk, occasionally muttering to himself. Finally, mercifully, a knock came at the door. Mr. Crawford, telegram from Denver, marked urgent. With a sigh, the railway director rose and left the office. The moment the door closed, Zara scrambled from her hiding place and made for the window. It was small, but she was determined. After a brief struggle, she managed to force it open and squeeze through, dropping into an alley behind the building. She ran without looking back, only slowing when she reached the church at the edge of town. There, in the shadow of the small steeple, she leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. That was too close, came Ethan's voice as he emerged from around the corner. When Crawford showed up early, I tried to warn you, but I found it, Zara interrupted, withdrawing the folded paper from her bodice. Evidence that they targeted my family. Crawford authorized it specifically? Ethan took the document, scanning it quickly. His face darkened. This is it. Proof of conspiracy and likely murder. He looked up at her, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. You could have been caught, but I wasn't, she replied, still breathless. What happens now? Now we take this to Judge Hollister when he arrives next week. With this evidence, he can issue warrants for Crawford and his men. And if Crawford discovers it's missing before then, Ethan's expression was grim. Then things get complicated. We should get you somewhere safe. Crawford saw me checking his office. He'll be suspicious. I won't hide, Zara insisted. This is my fight too. Before Ethan could argue, the church door opened and Reverend Thomas stepped out. Miss Dawson, Marshal Porter, he greeted them. Is everything all right? You both look troubled. Ethan hesitated, then made a decision. Reverend, we may need your help and your discretion. Inside the small church, they explained the situation. The Reverend, a former Union Army chaplain with steel beneath his gentle demeanor, listened gravely. You can stay in the mission house behind the church, he offered Zara. Few know it exists, and those who do respect church sanctuary. Thank you, Reverend, she said gratefully. But what about the evidence? Crawford will tear the town apart looking for it if he discovers it missing. I have a solution for that, Ethan said. The territorial judge isn't our only option. The federal marshal in Santa Fe can issue the same warrants, and he's a 3-day ride from here. You're leaving? Zara couldn't keep the dismay from her voice. It's the safest option, Ethan explained. Crawford will be watching you and me, but he won't expect the document to leave town. Once I'm gone, you stay hidden until I return with proper authorities." Though she wanted to argue, Zara recognized the logic. "When will you go?" "Tonight, after dark. The less notice, the better." As evening fell, Zara settled into the small mission house with provisions brought discreetly by Mrs. Rogers. Ethan arrived as the last light faded from the sky, carrying his saddlebags. "I've made copies of the document," he told her, producing several identical papers. "Reverend Thomas has one hidden in the church. I'm carrying another, and you should keep the original." "Where?" Zara asked, looking around the sparsely furnished room. Ethan removed a small leather pouch from his neck. "My mother's locket," he explained, opening it to reveal a tiny compartment behind what would normally hold a miniature portrait. "She used it to hide emergency money during the war. The paper will fit if we fold it small enough." Together they carefully folded the document until it fit the tiny space. As Ethan closed the locket and handed it to her, their fingers brushed, lingering longer than necessary. "I'll be back as soon as possible," he promised, his voice low. "Be careful," she whispered. "Crawford's men will be watching the trails." "I know a few paths they don't," he assured her with a confidence that both reassured and worried her. As he turned to leave, Zara impulsively caught his arm. "Ethan, she faltered, uncertain what she wanted to say. He waited, his eyes searching hers in the lamplight. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for believing me, for helping me find justice." "It's what your father deserved," he replied. "It's what you deserve." Still, not every lawman would risk so much. A smile touched his lips. Not every woman would climb through a window to escape a railway director either. The tension broke, and they shared a quiet laugh. Then, with unexpected gentleness, Ethan touched her cheek. "Stay safe, Zara Dawson. I'll come back for you." After he left, Zara fingered the locket around her neck, the metal already warm from her skin. She hadn't expected to feel this way not so soon after losing her parents, not about the town marshal, not when her life was in such turmoil. Yet there it was, an unmistakable connection that had grown from shared purpose into something more. The next 3 days passed with excruciating slowness. Zara remained hidden in the mission house, receiving occasional updates from Reverend Thomas. Crawford's men were indeed searching the town, though they hadn't approached the church yet. On the third night, a commotion woke her from a fitful sleep. Voices, shouting, and the sound of running footsteps came from the direction of the church. Zara quickly dressed, heart pounding, and peered through the small window. In the moonlight, she could see several men surrounding the church, lanterns in hand. One of them was unmistakably Crawford, his tall figure distinctive even at a distance. "Search everything," he commanded. The marshal was seen returning an hour ago. He must have the document. Ethan was back. Zara's heart leapt, then plummeted. If Crawford's men found him with the evidence, making a swift decision, she slipped out the back door of the mission house. Keeping to the shadows, she circled behind the church, trying to get a better view of what was happening. As she crept along the wall, a hand suddenly clamped over her mouth. She struggled until a familiar voice whispered, "It's me. Stay quiet." Ethan released her and she turned to face him in the darkness. "You're back early," she whispered. "Rode hard," he explained tersely. "Federal Marshal is a day behind with a dozen men, but Crawford must have had lookouts on the trails. They spotted me returning." "They're searching the church," Zara told him. "Crawford knows about the document. Jenkins must have talked," Ethan muttered. "We need to move. They'll find the mission house soon." "Where can we go? The whole town will be watched." Ethan took her hand. "Not the whole town, come on." They slipped from shadow to shadow, avoiding the main streets where Crawford's men were now spreading out from the church. Ethan led her to the livery stable where 2 horses were already saddled. "We ride for your family's land," he explained as they mounted. "It's the last place they'll expect us to go." They rode hard through the night, leaving the town behind. The moon provided just enough light to navigate, and Ethan seemed to know every fold in the land. By dawn, they were approaching the burned remains of the Dawson farm. Why here? Zara asked as they dismounted near a stand of cottonwoods by the creek far enough from the house to avoid being spotted immediately. Because I left something here on my way back, Ethan replied, leading her to a hollow tree. From inside, he withdrew a package wrapped in oilskin. The federal marshal's advance party. They arrived last night and are positioned around your property. As if on cue, 4 men emerged from various hiding places, rifles ready but not pointed at them. Marshal Porter, acknowledged the lead man, a grizzled veteran with a thick mustache. Miss Dawson, Marshal Wilkes sent us ahead when your telegram reached Santa Fe, said it sounded like the railway boys might try something desperate. Good timing, Ethan replied. Crawford's figured out we have evidence against him. He's searching the town now. Then he's in for a surprise, the federal deputy smiled grimly. Rest of our men are approaching from the south. They should intercept anyone following you from town. For the first time in days, Zara felt hope rising, so it's almost over. Almost, Ethan confirmed, though his expression remained vigilant. We still need to. He was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. The federal men immediately moved into defensive positions while Ethan pulled Zara behind the shelter of the tree. 6 riders, reported one of the deputies. Coming fast from the direction of town. Crawford, Ethan muttered, sooner than I expected. The approaching riders came into view, dust rising behind them in the early morning light. At their head rode William Crawford with James Mercer and 4 other men flanking him. They pulled up short when they spotted the armed men waiting for them. Crawford's face, visible even at a distance, registered shock and then calculation. Federal marshals, he called out. What brings you to this remote corner of the territory? Investigation into railway land acquisition practices, replied the lead deputy. And potential connection to multiple crimes, including arson and murder. Crawford straightened in his saddle. Preposterous. We're a legitimate business operating within the law. Then you won't mind accompanying us to Santa Fe to discuss the matter, the deputy replied evenly. For a moment, it seemed Crawford might comply. Then, with startling swiftness, he drew a pistol and fired. The bullet struck one of the federal men in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. What followed was chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides as the federal marshals and Crawford's men exchanged shots. Ethan pushed Zara down behind the tree, shielding her with his body. Stay here, he ordered, drawing his own weapon and joining the fight. Zara watched in horror as men fell on both sides. Crawford himself remained mounted, using his horse as cover while directing his men. When Mercer took aim at Ethan, who was exposed as he moved to help a wounded marshal, Zara acted without thinking. She grabbed a fallen deputy's rifle and fired a warning shot that caused Mercer's horse to rear, spoiling his aim. The distraction gave Ethan the chance to dive for cover. Crawford, seeing his advantage slipping away, suddenly wheeled his horse and galloped toward Zara's position. Realizing his intent, she scrambled to her feet, but he was on her before she could escape, leaning from his saddle to grab her arm. The document, Miss Dawson. He demanded, yanking her half off her feet. Now, or I'll finish what we started with your family. Ethan's voice cut through the chaos. Let her go, Crawford, it's over. The railway director turned, still gripping Zara's arm, to see Ethan standing with his pistol aimed steadily at Crawford's head. It's not over until I say it's over, Marshal, Crawford snarled. Drop your weapon or she dies. For a terrible moment, Zara thought Ethan might comply. Instead, he smiled a cold, confident expression that made even Crawford hesitate. You're surrounded, Crawford. Federal marshals behind you, more coming from the south. The evidence is already in official hands. There's no escape. Crawford's grip tightened painfully on Zara's arm as he glanced around, seeing the truth of Ethan's words. 3 of his men were down, Mercer was wounded, and the surviving federal deputies had them covered from multiple angles. Then I have nothing to lose, Crawford hissed, starting to draw his gun toward Zara. She reacted instinctively, driving her elbow hard into his side. As he gasped in pain, his grip loosened enough for her to tear free, falling to the ground. Ethan's shot rang out simultaneously, striking Crawford in the shoulder and knocking him from his horse. The remaining railway men, seeing their leader fallen, quickly surrendered. In the aftermath, as the wounded were tended and prisoners secured, Zara found herself sitting beside Ethan on the steps of what had once been her family's porch. The federal marshals had established a temporary camp nearby while waiting for reinforcements to help transport the prisoners. "It really is over now," Zara said softly, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. "The legal proceedings will take time," Ethan cautioned. "But yes, the immediate danger is past." She touched the locket still hanging around her neck. "What happens to the land to me?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That depends on what you want, Zara. The land is yours by right. You could rebuild, make a new start here." Alone, the prospect, which once would have seemed like independence, now felt hollow. "Not necessarily alone," Ethan said carefully, his eyes meeting hers. "Unless you want to be." Zara felt her heart quicken. "What are you saying, Marshal Porter?" "I'm saying that when I rode to Santa Fe, I had a lot of time to think. About justice, yes, but also about you, about us." He took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I'd like to help you rebuild if you'll let me. Not just as the marshal, but as a man who finds himself caring deeply for a remarkably brave woman." Zara's eyes filled with tears, not of grief this time, but of something more complex and hopeful. "Even after knowing me less than 2 weeks," Ethan smiled. "Some things don't need much time to be certain. The moment I saw you kneeling by those graves, trying so hard to pray through your pain, I felt something I've never felt before. A connection. A purpose beyond the badge." "I felt it too," she admitted. "When you took my hands that day, when you said you'd answer beside me forever." "I meant it," he said simply. "Not just for that prayer, but for all the prayers to come, for all the days to come if you'll have me." Zara looked out over her land, seeing not the destruction of the past, but the possibility of the future. A home rebuilt, a life reclaimed. And beside her, a man who had risked everything to help her find justice. "I would like that very much," she whispered, letting her hand find his. As the morning sun bathed the New Mexico landscape in golden light, Ethan Porter and Zara Dawson sat together on the charred steps of what would become their home, their fingers intertwined, their hearts aligned, answering the future's call side by side.